Welcome back to another best FPL wildcard team, this time out of Gameweek 32, and this video and podcast is recorded on the Wednesday. A lot could change by the time you see this, so bear that in mind. I'll keep you updated in the comment section and also in future videos and live streams, and the aim is to get all the main pieces of content for FPL and UCL Fantasy up on the channel. As usual, I am on holiday, but I'll still try to get the deadline streams for both fantasy formats and of course the team selections as well. The FPL one is already live on the channel. I want to see your thoughts as well about this wildcard team, and be sure to check the links in the description below for my Patreon, patreon.com/DylanRCM. Join as a channel member by clicking the join button. There's also links to my Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM. Follow me on Reddit, the same handle there as well, FPL Dylan and DylanRCM. You can find me on all of those platforms, and also check the Discord server, join the FPL League, the FPL Challenge League, and leave a 5-star review on Spotify and Amazon Music. Without further ado, let's jump straight into it. It's worth noting that for those watching on YouTube, the graphics on the left-hand side are from Gameweek 30, and I haven't fully updated them because Gameweek 31 is still in its infancy, so only 4 of my players have played so far, and there is so much football yet to be played in Gameweek 31, so you'll find out how I did in future videos and live streams, probably in the Gameweek 32 deadline stream on Saturday. I'll keep you updated on future content on this channel since I'm still on holiday, but let's get straight into the best wildcard team for Gameweek 32. A lot depends on your team situations and your chip strategies. I can't stress that enough. So in Gameweek 34, if you are free hitting, I wouldn't go for David Raya because you can just free hit him in for that game week, and then afterwards you can focus on your potential bench boost in Gameweek 37. And I'll show you later on the goalkeepers and squad I'd go for if you have the free hit to use in Gameweek 34. But this squad for the wildcard that I'm showing you right now is for those wildcarding in Gameweek 32 that want to tackle Gameweek 34 and 37, those 2 major double game weeks, whilst also having this foundation and solid base for the rest of the season. It will be very difficult, I'm not going to lie to you, especially if you want a bench boost in 37, and ideally you'd want a wildcard around Gameweek 35 to optimize that chip in particular. But David Raya is one of the very best double Gameweek 34 goalkeepers, and the same can be said about Kelleher and Pickford. Go for one of those 3 if you want a double Gameweek goalkeeper, but with Kelleher, he might not start both games in the double because Alisson could be back in parts of team training by next week. So that could be a major cause for concern. The same goes for the likes of Diogo Jota and Trent Alexander-Arnold. They'll be in full training by next week, which does put the likes of Diaz, Darwin Nunez and Conor Bradley in doubt to some extent, especially in double Gameweek 34. But the other goalkeeper I'm going to go for with this setup remains the same, and I think it goes for if you are free hitting or not in 34, it doesn't really matter. I still like Petrovic in terms of a cheap goalkeeper, around 4.6 million with 2 upcoming doubles and great fixtures. But Robert Sanchez is back in training, so that could be a cause for concern. And if you don't want to go for him, Onana is a very good replacement who doubles in Gameweek 37 and has great fixtures from Gameweek 33 and beyond. But going for Raya and Onana does seem a bit too much in terms of investing that much money in the goalkeeper position. Raya and Petrovic is ideal for those that aren't free hitting in Gameweek 34. With Nathan Ake currently injured, Cavadio could be a great short-term option, but this is the problem with wildcarding in Gameweek 32 and also hoping for the best in terms of doublers in Gameweek 37. By the time we get to that stage of the season, at the very end of the campaign, Cavadio might not be as safe as he is right now because the likes of Nathan Ake could return by then, and the same goes for Kyle Walker and John Stones. So Cavadio looks great right now, but that might not be the case in a couple of weeks' time. So just bear that in mind, and it could be a bit of a risky pick in the long term. But my second defender is definitely not going to be. He's always going to start every single game, despite being benched in the first few games of the season, and that's Gabriel. You can go for Kivior, Saliba, or Ben White, and especially in the case of Saliba and Ben White, they're also as nailed as Gabriel is. But in terms of attacking potential, I think Gabriel has the best, and he's got the most goals of any defender since joining the Premier League a few years ago. But Gabriel might not be the perfect option, for example, with some of the fixtures being quite tough for Arsenal, and that's why doubling up on the Arsenal defence isn't ideal at this stage of the campaign, but they have the best defence overall. The underlying numbers show that. They've conceded the fewest goals, scored the most, and Gabriel is a major part for that. And I think Gabriel is one of the most underrated players, especially amongst non-Arsenal fans. The next defender also means we're doubling up on 2 defences. I'm not a big fan of that, but Gusto is so cheap. He is currently flagged in FPL, but we have gotten reports that Gusto should be available against Manchester United at the time of this recording. And even if he isn't, he should be available for Game Week 33. So the latest we got, according to Pochettino, is that Gusto and Chalobah have trained and they are ready to be in the squad against Manchester United. So that's great news there about Malo Gusto, who is probably the best option at that price and below, with 2 upcoming doubles and also great fixtures for Chelsea. But after that, things get very interesting. Only 2 defender slots left. I talked about this defender a lot. He also was in my FPL challenge team. I'm a bit gutted I didn't go for him in my normal squad, but very soon, 8 Nuri could easily come in, and I'm looking at Game Week 33, but the possibility exists for me to buy him in Game Week 32 for Alfie Doughty. Check out my team selection video and podcast to see my reasoning about holding off a little bit longer on 8 Nuri, but it might be different in your situation. And if you can buy 8 Nuri right now, I'd highly recommend it. He scored in Game Week 31 against Burnley in a 1-1 draw, which I actually predicted in the deadline stream. Now, in terms of the final defender, this is where things get very interesting, and I'd only go for him if you aren't free hitting in Game Week 34, because otherwise he's one of the best options for that specific double. I like him a lot for Game Week 33 as well, but for those that are free hitting in Game Week 34, I think the appeal of this defender reduces dramatically with that chip. But Virgil van Dijk for me is the most safe Liverpool defender you can go for. I know Conor Bradley has a higher ceiling. He's a bit more exciting to own, but Virgil van Dijk is just a safe, secure option. He's going to start every single game, and you would expect clean sheets against Crystal Palace and potentially 1 in double Game Week 34. But he's very expensive. It does limit you in some areas, and going for a cheaper option might be the best play for some of you to open up the doors to make upgrades elsewhere. This defensive 5 does offer some versatility and variety despite having 2 defensive double-ups for Arsenal and Chelsea. But remember, you can go for a different setup in the goalkeeper position and not go for Petrovic if you are a bit unsure about Robert Sanchez taking his place. And with David Raya instead, you can go for Kelleher or Pickford instead. So it's up to you how you play it. But for those that aren't free hitting in Game Week 34, I think this defensive line looks very solid for the next 4 or 5 game weeks. Saka's been yellow flagged so many times this season, and he was subbed off against Man City in Game Week 30 due to fatigue. There are some concerns about him starting against Luton Town later tonight, but I think he will start that game. I have no concerns about that, and whenever Saka is fit and there is no risk of aggravating an injury, he's going to start and play a good number of minutes, and I personally think he'll get at least 70 plus, but of course a lot does depend on game state. Some of you have been asking, can I go for a Kai Havertz, an Odegaard or Martinelli to go a bit differential? And of course you can, and Havertz has been in great form, probably the best of any Arsenal player in the last 5 game weeks, but I still think Saka is a step above in terms of consistency, being the main penalty taker and having incredible underlying numbers. And the same can be said about the next midfielder, Mohamed Salah, the best midfielder and player to own up until Game Week 35. From that point onwards, especially if you're looking to bench boost in Game Week 37, Salah might have to be one of those unfortunate sacrifices you have to make to be able to have a 50-man squad full of doublers in Game Week 37. But for the meantime, for the next couple of weeks, you have to have Salah for double Game Week 34. So if you don't have the free hit, buy Salah at all costs, even in Game Week 32 or Game Week 33. Now, the next midfielder, it normally would be Phil Foden, and I think for those that have the free hit, you can definitely go for him still. But for those that don't have the chip, I would go for Luis Diaz and double up on that Liverpool attack. But as I mentioned earlier, Diogo Jota could be back in training by next week, and by the time we get to double Game Week 34, Diaz might not start both games. But if you're asking me right now, I think Diaz is more safe than Darwin Núñez in terms of minutes, and I would expect the Colombian to start both games in double Game Week 34, but the possibility has certainly decreased with the news of Jota, Trent, and all these players coming back in the next week or so. The main one to look out for, of course, is Diogo Jota. You also have Gakpo waiting. He's a bit further down the pecking order, but Liverpool could rotate with that congested fixture schedule. Now, the other 2 midfielder slots we have, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Cole Palmer is essential. Just go for him. You will have no regrets whatsoever. The only downside to owning Cole Palmer is that he's so template, but that's the only negative I can find for owning such a good FPL asset. Now, the final midfielder has poor fixtures in Game Week 32 and 33, but in Game Week 34 he looks great, and that's Eze. I'd highly recommend him, and Elise could be back fairly soon, which boosts Eze's prospects. I think those two is a very underrated duo, and I would actually even make a case for owning both of them by the time we get to double Game Week 34. And if you have the luxury of being able to sell Palmer for 1 week, then buying back for Game Week 35, that's something you could heavily consider to go for both Elise and Eze in your midfield 5. Dominic Solanke is a very important FPL asset for those that don't have the free hit to use in Game Week 34, and Bournemouth's fixtures are still looking quite good in Game Week 32 and 33. By the time we get to Game Week 35, I think Solanke's a sell, but for the next couple of weeks, Solanke is as good as you can get in the forward line. For those with the free hit, I'll talk about some alternatives in that position later on, but Solanke for me is still one of the best forwards for a very short while. I don't think he's a medium to long-term pick with Bournemouth's fixtures turning very soon, but up until Game Week 34, just go for Solanke and don't overcomplicate it. Now, the second forward I'm going for here is Manice, but you can go for Mateta instead. But in terms of maybe doubling up on the Crystal Palace attack and you're not going for Elise and Eze, I'm not too keen. I think those two are worth doubling up on. But with Mateta, I'm a bit less sure of that. But that is still an option for you, especially if you have the funds available in the bank. So if you were to do that sort of move, then Mateta in for Manice could be really good. But just bear in mind that Manice is a better option in Game Week 32, 33 and Game Week 35. But Mateta could be a very important differential for Game Week 34. If you do go for this double up in the attack, I wouldn't go for Elise as well. I think a triple up in that attack is far too excessive, to say the least. And the final forward is Erling Haaland. You might think that's very boring. That's absolutely fair enough. But he doubles in 37. Great fixtures until the end of the season. And it's Luton Town at home in Game Week 33. You don't want to go without Erling Haaland in that game week, let me assure you of it. And the only downside to owning Erling Haaland, apart from him being so template, is that rotation is possible for Manchester City assets with the Champions League coming along very soon against Real Madrid of all teams. And if they go through, you've got the likes of Arsenal or Bayern Munich waiting for them. But this is a very solid 50-man squad, and you really focus on double Game Week 34. You might want to strike a bit more of a balance, though, in terms of 37 and 34. So maybe instead of Solanke, you can go for Isak, or you can go for Foden instead of Luis Diaz. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. But very quickly, I'm going to show you what Drafthound recommend for the Game Week 32 wildcard, then show you the starting 11 for this squad and the captaincy. And after that, I'll show you an alternative team for those that are free hitting in Game Week 34. There is a link to Drafthound in the description below, and many of you are signing up using my link and talking about how useful this resource is with so many different tools at your disposal. And they show you the best wildcard and free hit teams for every single game week. And for the wildcard, it's Pickford in goal with White, Aït-Nouri and Branthwaite as the back three, Palmer, Salah, Odegaard, Havertz and Luis Diaz as the midfield 5, with Haaland and Isak up front. I particularly like that Isak pick and some nice differentials in the midfield like Odegaard and Havertz, who could be very useful for double Game Week 34. And they've gone for a bench of Neto, Semenyo, Bradley and Smith. It's a great wildcard team in my opinion, but the only kind of downsides to it is doubling up on that Everton defence. That's probably a big con. And also doubling up on the Bournemouth defence with Smith and Neto, and Semenyo was benched in Game Week 31. But apart from those picks, I think every other choice there is very solid, to say the least, and they've got some great differentials in there. Even Ben White over Gabriel or Saliba can be deemed as a sort of differential pick from Drafthound. So be sure to check the link in the description below. You can try out for free, but I'd highly recommend you try out one of the pro pay tier memberships, which is very cheap and accessible for everyone watching. Let's now head over to FPL Team and talk about the wildcard squad I was highlighting throughout most of this video and podcast, and talk about the captaincy and the bench. In goal, I'd go for Petrovic away to Sheffield United and double up on Chelsea with Malo Gusto, and potentially go for a back four with Gvardiol, Gusto, Gabriel and Aït-Nouri, a midfield 4 of Palmer, Diaz, Salah and Saka, and a front 2 of Haaland and Solanke, and the bench includes Raya, Virgil van Dijk, Eze and Mateta, but you can go for Manice instead as another particular example. The expected points is 54.2 and not much left in the bank for me personally. I think I do have a little bit more than FPL Team suggests, but if you have to make some downgrades because you can't afford this team, you could consider Saka down to a Havertz or a Martin Odegaard, and the same can be said about downgrading Mateta to Manice. There's a few things you can do, and Virgil van Dijk is very expensive. He's safe for Game Week 34, and that's why I've gone for him, but you might want to consider a Conor Bradley or maybe a Joe Gomez instead. Now, for Game Week 33, it's worth mentioning the future Game Weeks as well. You can roll the transfer and have a solid base for Game Week 33 with Petrovic in goal, Gvardiol, Virgil van Dijk, Gabriel, Aït-Nouri is the back four, Palmer, Luis Diaz, Salah and Saka, and also Haaland and Solanke with Raya, Gusto, Eze and Mateta on the bench. It's completely up to you if you want to start Raya or Petrovic. Then in Game Week 34, you can have this squad, which is fully stacked in terms of double Game Week players. We're also going to put Raya in the starting 11, and that makes it 10 out of 11 players with a double, and the other one is Erling Haaland away to Brighton. So it looks really solid in my opinion. You can captain Salah or Saka, with my preference being Salah, of course, and you still have a solid foundation for Game Week 35 until the end of the season. And look at the expected points for Game Week 34, 115.5. That is incredible. And if you can score that number of points, you're guaranteed a green arrow and also a good position by the end of that game week. But now let me show you a Game Week 32 wildcard team for those that have the free hit to use in double Game Week 34. This wildcard squad is also quite similar, but there are some key differences. So Onana instead of David Raya, and you can go for a different goalkeeper instead of Petrovic if you wish. But I'm also going for Gvardiol and Gusto yet again. The same goes for Gabriel and Aït-Nouri. But the key change in the backline is going for a doggy instead of Virgil van Dijk. You can free hit in for Game Week 34. The midfield four is also identical, but instead of Luis Diaz, we've gone for Phil Foden because you can buy the Colombian in Game Week 34 on your free hit. And the front three includes Haaland, Isak, and Maniz. I think Isak is an incredible option until the end of the season, but my main concern with him, and it always has been, is can he stay injury-free for a long period of time and start 5 games in a row? That's the only concern I have about him. But in terms of fixtures, the double in 37, Isak is as good as you can get. If you're bench boosting in 37, go for Isak if he's fit and there's no Callum Wilson to maybe take some minutes off him by that stage of the season. I've also gone for Maniz instead of the likes of Mateta, but that's completely up to you. Just bear in mind that Maniz isn't that great in Game Week 34 against Liverpool at home, and in Game Week 37, it's Manchester City at home. So he doesn't have good fixtures in the 2 most important doubles left in this season. But my bench would include Onana, Gordon, Aït-Nouri and Gabriel. And you don't even need to go for Gordon. You can go for Garnacho instead as a budget midfielder. And there's 1.2 million in the bank to make some more upgrades depending on your preferences. And if there's one player you don't particularly like, you can go for a different option instead. But this wildcard squad is certainly more accessible to the vast majority of you. And I want to see your thoughts down in the comment section below. Do you like this wildcard team more than the first one? Of course, a lot depends on if you're free hitting in Game Week 34. That's the determining factor behind some of these picks. And for the bench boost in 37, if I'm being completely honest, it's probably best to wildcard in Game Week 35 to have the best bench boost team possible for Game Week 37. Thank you very much for watching this video and listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it or found it useful, then be sure to smash the like button and subscribe for new. Let's get this video to over 200 likes and let's keep on pushing towards 23k subscribers and beyond. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, for all the latest FPL and useful fantasy updates. Check out my Patreon, patreon.com/DylanRCM, and also the Discord server. Join as a channel member on YouTube for early access to my videos, just like with Patreon. There's also links to my FPL League and FPL Challenge League, the Discord server, and also to Drafthound. I'd highly recommend checking that out. There's also links to my Spotify and Amazon Music. Leave a 5-star review and listen to those podcasts as well. I wish you all the best of luck for Game Week 31, 32, and the rest of the season. And I'll see you next time.